Hello, everybody. I'm going to just get us started here. First of all, holding up this most freaking amazing book, which if you haven't ordered it yet or read it, you've got to do it today. Do it now. I think he put a link to ordering the book in the program.
With a discount.
Yeah, and with a discount. So the title of the book is Mindful Activism, Autoethnographies of Social Justice Communication for Campus and Community Transformation. A long title, but a perfectly accurate title to what this book offers you. So I'm really excited about that. And of course, I want to introduce the authors, Lisa Tillmann, Kathryn Norsworthy, and Steve Schoen. It's Stephen here, but Steve Schoen. So we're all in one corner here on my screen. So thank you very much for that. So we have such a short period of time. I'm going to get right to it because what you really want to know, first of all, I'm telling you what you want to know, is how each of these authors were drawn into mindful activism and telling their story through autoethnography. So Lisa, would you like to start?
That sounds great. Thank you so much. So again, Lisa Tillmann, my pronouns are she, her. Big thanks and shout out Tony Adams, Keith Berry, Carolyn Ellis, Art Bachner, and all others who have contributed to this year's program. Our book's editor, Larry Fry, and of course, our generous moderator, Patricia Geist-Martin. We were so excited to see that she had been put forward as our moderator. So how drawn to mindful activism, especially autoethnographic approaches? So I would say, like for many of us attending this conference, my first connection in that arena was to autoethnography. Art Bachner was my PhD advisor, and Carolyn Ellis was on my dissertation committee. My PhD dissertation spanned from 1994 to 1998. It's an ally-accomplice autoethnographic account of my and my then husband's immersion into a network of gay male friends who became our surrogate family in Tampa, Florida, while I was studying at USF in Tampa. And at that time, my participant friends, just to name a few things on the civil rights front, could not serve openly in the military. In no state could they marry or even enter a civil union. They could not adopt children in Florida and 2 other states. They could not even legally have consensual sex with another adult of the same sex in Florida and 13 other states. They could be fired for no other reason than being or being perceived as LGBTQ. And so what started as a personal and then autoethnographic immersion, I would say very much sparked a more activist consciousness in me, but a consciousness that I probably didn't yet know much about what to do with. I was hired at Rollins College, which is in Winter Park, Florida, just outside Orlando in 1999. And the following year, I met Kathryn Norsworthy and one of my co-authors, and we became fast friends and also inaugural chairs of the campus, what was then called the Diversity Committee. And that has sparked a more than 2-decade personal, academic, and also activist collaboration, both in terms of on-campus initiatives and in the greater Orlando community. And so, for example, Kathryn and I helped spearhead the effort to add gender identity and expression to our college's non-discrimination policy. We also worked on successful initiatives in Orlando and Orange County to add civil rights protections on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And then in the pre-marriage equality era, also helped create the conditions by which domestic partner registries were formed in the city of Orlando and in Orange County. And then in terms of the mindful activism component, I would say that most directly ties to my relationship with Kathryn. This is the title of a course that she teaches. This is, before it was our book title, was the title of a major monograph that she published. And so this collaboration, which now has come to include our colleague, Steve Schoen, is among the very most meaningful and transformative set of experiences of my life. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Kathryn.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lisa. What a treat to be here. So just picking up, first of all, I think you've already heard that Lisa and I go way back, and that we really, I would have to say that the activism that we started being involved in once, Lisa, you arrived at Rollins, has been really powerful for me. And then to Steve, to bring you into it, once you got to Rollins, to be involved in the, you know, different initiatives you're doing in the city and on campus and so on, where it has been, what a wonderful way to spend activist life in such an amazing team, the three of us. I'll just add a couple things. I would say for me, the mindfulness part, I just wanted to say a couple of things about. I started practicing Buddhist meditation back in the 70s. And just long story short, was drawn to and got involved with the Tillmann order with Thich Nhat Hanh, the late Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a Vietnamese Buddhist activist who actually led a movement in Vietnam during the Vietnam War conflict for all sides to lay down arms simultaneously. This sort of led to his not leaving the country to go to the Paris Peace Accords and not being able to return. So I started studying meditation with him, and he kind of led the way in developing what we now call engaged Buddhism, which is mindful activism. And so that he has been a powerful influence on me. I've been to many different workshops and trainings, received the 5 precepts from him. So anyway, that has been really important. And I have found that mindfulness has been such a crucial resource for me, for example, in being able to engage in activism in a way that preserves my sanity, and also hopefully allows me to use, as we say in Engaged Buddhism, skillful means as much as possible in doing the work. So I'll just, 2 other areas I've been really involved with for many years would be gender justice and immigrant rights as well, and also ongoing work in racial justice. So I'll turn it over to Steve now.
Thank you very much. So I guess connecting to both those pieces, I'll maybe just start with the autoethnography piece, and that starts in my PhD program at USF, University of South Florida, and I started mostly as a documentary scholar, focusing on documentary, and so a lot of my work has been in kind of rhetorical approaches to that, critical cultural approaches to that. But I had a qualitative methods class with Carolyn Ellis, which led to my first published piece in cultural studies, critical methodologies, about a failed documentary project that just sort of collapsed out from under me. And it was a fun little piece and her Carolyn's encouragement and so forth pulled me into that autoethnographic perspective a little bit, and then hanging around with the right crowd, getting to know Lisa eventually at USF, and people in my PhD program like Tony Adams and so forth. Built a lot of connections to and a lot of appreciation for the value of autoethnography. And then to the point of this project, coming to Rollins as a gay man and figuring out what that identity meant as I connected with the campus and the broader community, and from within my department, Lisa was there as kind of a touchstone for all of that, and really kind of had already paved the way for a whole range of connections. And so quite naturally, as I began to engage around LGBTQ issues, a lot of that was connected with Lisa and then Kathryn. And so that really led to my introduction to mindfulness as a way of thinking about activism and a way of doing activism and being part of activism. And so that's what kind of pulled me into the project. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. That's a great background to what we're talking about here. I wanted to ask the authors if someone has a hand up as we go along. Do you want to wait for questions at the end, or do you want to let people speak before that?
Oh, I think people could jump in at
Okay.
any time. Yeah.
Okay. And so I just want to make that invitation. One of the things, you know, Keith said this, I'm retired, but I'm still working. I'm reading a lot of memoirs. And so I pulled this out and went, oh, I gotta do this. You know, it's so academic. I don't know if I'm up for this. And then I started reading it and I couldn't stop. And one of the things, there's many things I could say about why this is such a great book to read, to use in classes, is how much of each of the three authors give of themselves, their vulnerability, their willingness to say things about what they were feeling and what they were going through. So of course, I'm almost ready to do it again. I had many moments in the book where I was brought to tears by very important, poignant moments for each of the authors. So that's our next question, is if each of you could describe what you would see as one of the poignant or pivotal moments in your experience.
Steve, would you want to kick that one off?
Sure. Well, really, I'm going to just give a quick nod to a couple things before I kind of turn to the thing that I would want to focus on. Because there really were a lot of moments. Probably one of the key things for this whole project was the process that we used. We mostly authored chapters individually and then processed them, right? So we used this process, and Kathryn might talk a little bit more about that at some point. But those processes of sort of reading and engaging each other's work was just often very, very profound. So so the three things that come to mind, and I'll focus real briefly on two, and then a little more on the third, all happened in those sessions, right? So some with the chapter that Lisa did, oh, I'm going to mess up the title now, Long and Winding Road, right?
Wind and Winding Roads.
Winding Roads, right.
Yeah.
Just the so the connection with kind of just the amazing writing that she did, and her amazing kind of connection with one of our co-authors, well, let me just, so just through Lisa, right? And then some other moments through Kathryn, with some of the work that she did. And then the one that sort of leaps out for me most personally is the chapter that I authored, Say It Isn't So, about work that we did to address an effort on the campus at Rollins to exempt some religious organizations from having to adhere to our non-discrimination policies. And so we sort of fought that battle, and it was a real moment of kind of addressing my own gay identity, and also a moment of just real struggle to kind of preserve this, and not even gain ground, but kind of keep from losing ground. And what was most poignant, I think, was realizing the sort of level of trauma that it brought for me. And in the discussion afterwards, Kathryn talked about the value of kind of writing and naming kind of trauma and pain, and it just brought a lot of pieces together for me. Just that kind of the sort of feeling of exhaustion and pain, but being able to express that with support and in the context of doing something about it, if that makes sense. And I forgot who I'm
Thank
going.
you. Oh. Okay. Thank you, Steve. Writing that, working with that chapter was quite that one came up for me. Also, the three of us, we have this is an area, of course, where we have such shared sort of, identities and histories and so on. Lisa, your long work and long friendships and serving as the most amazing ally accomplice for the queer community, of which I am also a part. And Steve, then, our work as well, the three of us, but then our work as well on campus around sort of trying to hold on to the ground we had gained in relation to anti-discrimination protections, the culture that we've worked so hard to create over the years. And I just will mention that part of it. So, participating in the writing of that chapter, you wrote the main story and we talked behind the scenes, but then doing our debriefing, and getting together on that was just really something for me to experience, because I felt like I was experiencing your, what you were writing about. I was in it with you, walking with you as you were writing it. One of the things, and you kind of this up, is, and my background is I'm a counseling psychologist. So I'm coming at this from a little bit, different background. And I want to say, Lisa, you turned me on to autoethnography, right? You know that, because I had been enculturated into this, as you might imagine. I was raised in this very traditional, psychology focused approach to research. It took a long time to break into qualitative research for psychology. We're now doing more of it, especially in my field. But I told Lisa, after I started working with you, Lisa, that, and then Steve, you continued to bring me in, is I never wanted to do any other kind of research again, other than an ethnographic and autoethnographically oriented approach. what I discovered through both the writing of the chapter I focused on, which had to do with queer border crossings, I called it, meaning the long history of collaboration I've been doing in South and Southeast Asia, but also then with Steve's chapter, is through ethnography, and through that process, I really discovered the power for healing, which has already been implied. Steve, I think you implied that in what you just said, and how, being able to really sort of, with compassionate witnesses, process what we experience, which I think the three of us did on a regular basis in putting together each chapter. It allowed for a mind, body, spirit kind of processing of the what we had been through, and allowed us to, as they say when we've been through trauma, to construct an autobiographical narrative complete with affect. And that is what we need to do as human beings in order to be able to really, as I call it, metabolize these experiences. One other piece I just want to mention in my border crossing chapter, the other thing I just wanted to bring out is one of the experiences in that chapter was collaboration with my two a Thai and Burma collaborator, in working with a group of women from Burma, and we were working on building capacity for, supporting them and building capacity in the democracy movement. Let me just shout out, which is, they're really having to return to all of that now, because Burma, just want to mention, if people aren't aware, is really back in the throes of it again, when the work we were doing was involved with trying to overthrow the junta at that time, and now it's come back again. But there was for me, a poignant moment when, with the sort of leadership of my two colleagues, because they are the experts on their own experiences and their own contexts, we decided to come out as a team, because all three of us identified as queer with the group, and it was the first time. And so all that happened as a result of that, and the ways in which members of the group actually came out with us as we engaged in this activity that sort of allowed for that to happen, was extremely powerful, and something I'll never forget. And the debriefing we did after was so important for me, and really being able to process that.
All right. So if you read the description, and you may have intuited from this, each of the chapters, and Steve sort of set this up, has both a narrative, and then it has a meta-narrative that is a creative reconstruction of the debrief that Steve and Kathryn and I, and in one case, one other collaborator did. And so there's a range of activist experiences represented in mindful activism. And so in some cases, it's really one person's account of their activist moment or multi-year activist campaign. So queer border crossings is an example of that. In some other cases, two or all three of us were actually involved in a moment, a movement, a campaign. The chapter that Steve previewed, Say It Ain't So, is an example of that. And then I just want to spotlight for a moment chapter 4, which Steve also alluded to, which is called Wind and Winding Roads, Friendship Amid Indefinite Confinement. So this involves a collaboration with one other person. His name is Jeff Holmgren, and he is involuntarily confined to a secure treatment facility for persons who have been convicted of sex offenses. He also is someone that I knew in high school in the 1980s. I came across his appeal of his civil commitment when I was doing research for a course that I teach called Incarceration and Inequality. And since about 2015, he and I speak by phone nearly every week. And then I have visited him multiple times at the facility where he is involuntarily confined. After 2 of those visits, Jeff and I each wrote an account of what happened at the visit in the first person. And then I wove those 2 accounts together in each case to form a third person account. And so those are sort of the heart of the narrative section of the chapter. And then in the debrief, Jeff actually was able to participate with Kathryn, Steve, and me. And we had to undertake this, and you would see this if you engaged chapter 4, as a series of 15-minute calls to the facility that are subject to being monitored and recorded. And if you know someone who is involuntarily confined or incarcerated, you likely have experienced context in this format. But that moment really stands out to me because it was really the first time that anyone in my network of relationship had sort of experienced the way that I experienced dialoguing with Jeff in this monitored, recorded, disciplined, confined to 15-minute series of dialogic moments. And so I just wanted to spotlight that.
Wonderful. That I was hoping, Lisa, I almost wish I had asked the other question first, because it was so important to talk about the uniqueness of the structure of this book. It's almost, well, it's a collaborative autoethnography, not only with the participants in each of your studies, but with each other, which is absolutely the real, true, unusual and interesting aspect of this book. So we've kind of touched a little bit, and I appreciate that, on the structure of how you wrote the individual narratives and then the collaboration. But I'm wondering if each of you might talk a little bit about how that structure resonated, worked for you, and how it kind of had a big part to play in the development of your friendship with one another. Maybe we'll have Kathryn start this time.
Thank you. Well, needless to say, you've already been hearing it. I think, that part of the process, at least for me, really was powerful. And I feel like it drew us all together at a whole new level. It was sort of like going on a journey. The writing of the book was like going on a journey with you two, Lisa and Steve, the 3 of us. And so let me start by saying, as has already been mentioned, we would have each person, of the 3 of us would take charge of writing the narrative, writing the story, the autoethnographic reflections. And then once the story was put together, we would all read it. And then we would come together and we would sit together and engage in this process that was originally developed by David Kolb. And he developed this model. It's an experiential learning model. He's particularly developed it for adult learners, because one of the things he realized is that it was really important that we go beyond the head level in sort of taking in what we are learning, and that we really engage with the material in a particular way that allows us to, process it, really reflect on it, and see what we learned and how we can apply what we learned as a way to really internalize the learnings. The other, I just want to give a shout out also though to the UMass Amherst group, the social justice education team was headed by Marianne Adams, who took that model and really applied it to social justice education. And they have 2 books, Readings for Diversity and Social Justice and Teachings for Diversity and Social Justice, just in case you're interested, that really talk in more depth about how they have sort of adapted the Kolb model to apply to these kinds of processes, particularly, and we found that really helpful for the activism part. So we would get together. The process involves reflecting on what stood out for us when we read each other's stories. What stood out? What were we feeling? What did we notice? So this is what I call mindful inquiry. This is the process of really just before we get to the head part, looking at what happened in our bodies, what happened emotionally, what happened, in terms of thoughts as well. And so then we would record those. We both recorded this process via audio, but then I would stand up and we would record it on the board. So we had the reflection phase. Then we would move to the next part, which is called generalization. Kolb calls it generalization. But this is what did we learn? What are the learnings then that stood out? And those we framed in a variety of ways. What did we learn about ourselves personally as activists? What did we learn about activism and social change? What did we learn about the topic, the whole area we were exploring? So we then went through and really sort of looked at those areas. Everybody contributed. We pulled all of that together. And then finally, we had the part called application. And we looked at how we might apply what we learned, in going forward as activists, in doing activism. And for the book, we also then created a set of questions for the reader to also engage with that, because we thought that if people were reading the chapters, perhaps they would also they would have their own sort of reflections, their own learnings, and they would then have their own applications. And if they were having a group read the chapter, the group could go through that process. So that's kind of the approach that we took. And again, I'm just going to stop with that so others can share. But I found that this process, it was a journey. It was a journey of really fostering deeper connection, and to me, building our little activist community and really being able to learn from one another and do the work even more effectively together. And I think, Lisa, are you next? You gonna?
Yeah, I'll pick it up from there. So this transformative learning model, or this experiential learning model that we adapted from David Kolb, and this is a strategy I picked up from Kathryn, as I pick up so many good ideas that I get to implement. This is the primary mode of facilitation or structure of facilitation that I now use in all of my classes. And so because the first stage of these 4 is experience, that can be anything. That can be a reading, that can be a documentary, that can be a film clip, that can be an interactive activity. And then the reflective observation, what happened, what stood out, tapping into the heart, tapping into the body, moving to abstract conceptualization, what can be learned, moving to active experimentation, how can we apply what we learn to new academic, civic, personal, and professional contexts. I have used this both in virtual classes, and then also now that we're back in in-person classes. And even in my in-person classes, I often build collaborative documents in Microsoft Teams where I have each student's name and for each of the stages, and we just sort of go through it together. And this is also kind of a Freirean model from Pedagogy of the Oppressed et al., which really kind of democratizes the classroom experience. And so whether you have people who are more extroverted or more introverted, everybody gets to participate. I often will take an extra minute at each stage to have people read over everybody else's contributions. And if they want to offer affirmations, they can put their name in brackets. And then this also I borrowed from Kathryn, often at the end of a major unit in a course, or even at the end of an entire course, we can debrief the entire unit, or indeed we can debrief the entire class. And in my own experience, it really has promoted a more holistic way of engaging material, where we're not just engaging it with our heads, but we're engaging it with our hearts and with our bodies and with our emotions. And at every turn, it reinforces that there are things you can only get to if you move beyond the head. I mean, I know that goes without saying in this particular conference environment, but I do think as academics, even as autoethnographers, it's easy to fall back into just engaging with our heads. So I'll stop there and invite Steve to add.
Thank you, Kathryn and Lisa. So a couple things that stand out for me. The first is just the reality of entering into kind of this existing activist community that was sort of centered around Lisa and Kathryn. And so really they invited me into their project, right? And then a number of things sort of came along. And so at that relational dimension, you can imagine how connecting with these two amazing people around these compelling and important issues that mattered a lot to me made all the difference, right? So much of activism can seem so overwhelming, right? And when you're forging these kinds of connections, right, it makes all the difference. It just was such a community of support, and one element that was particularly striking for me was we would kind of write these accounts, and then we would often read them out loud. And it was a profound experience. Just the embodied kind of dimension of that did a couple of things. It put the words in the mouth of the person speaking, right? But it also was a reminder of the bodily dimension of all these things that we were participating in. They weren't just ideas, right? They weren't words for feelings. They were actual feelings, right? There were actual events, right? It was a very powerful dimension for me. And so that part of the process and that part of the connecting with Lisa and Kathryn as embodied persons, right? In this kind of way was just very profound for me. And then the last piece, to go to, to the intellectual dimension. So it was so important to not just, go straight to the intellectual dimension, but we sort of got there, right, to this learnings part. And and I've had experiences like this in a way before, but more profoundly here than anywhere else, of just an appreciation for what I learned from these two amazingly insightful women, but then the sense of feeling so much smarter in my interaction with them, right? So all these are some of the things that surfaced for me.
Wonderful. That's so great. I just want to say, as a reader of the book, and those of you who have, I see some people have already ordered the book and are ready to go based on what you're talking about, is I felt like the reflection part was collaborative with me. So by the time you end up putting those questions at the end, I'd already started to ask them myself, because you have invited me into that discussion. So everything that Steve and Kathryn and Lisa are saying about the collaborative, participative nature of this book, unusual in that way of making me feel. And actually, my biggest regret after reading the book is that I didn't have a chance to teach with it. So I'm gonna have to figure out some way to do that, I think, because that was what the book did for me. Now, I do know in the chat that some people have asked about the resources from Amherst. Lisa put a resource in. So if any of you, Steve, Kathryn, Lisa, have any resources to add and throw into that chat, that would be great. Let's see if there's anything new. We have less than 10 minutes left. I have other questions, but I'm wondering if we want to open it up to people's questions. Let's see if there's something here. Talking about the key element. I don't see a question exactly. I think mainly what people are saying in the chat, which is phenomenal, read the chat, is how they're resonating with, how it's bringing up, how it's encouraging them to want to work in this way that you actually talk about. So if anyone has a question or would like to, add into this discussion, please go ahead and raise your hand and unmute yourself. I can call on you if I see your hand. Anyone? Let's see. Let's see. Someone said, do you mind repeating the transformation learning model?
Sure.
I can put that in the chat. Kathryn,
Great.
if you want to go over it verbally, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, sounds good. One thing I love these some of the comments. For example, I think Regan, I hope I pronounced your name right, when you talked about the idea learning is more effective through relationship. I think that I just want to second that. I think that's one of the sort of core elements of this this use of this model is it really involves deliberate efforts, especially Lisa talked about the ways we use it in the classroom, for example. I use it in workshops as well. But there is the first part involves really, we call it building the container, building the community, really doing lots of work so that people are feeling in relationship with one another, have developed, as Britton likes. I love what she talks about. She does participant action work. She talks about building just enough safety and trust when we're building community in order to be able to do the important work that needs to be, that we're trying to do. So what we're talking about here is, for example, if we're in a classroom or we're doing a workshop, as we've first built the community, then we may have some kind of experiential activity, there may be the first stage is experience. So in our case, it was reading these chapters, these stories, but sometimes we'd been involved in them as well. But reading and going through the story, but it could be, for example, some kind of experiential learning activity that centers around certain concepts, ideas, learnings that we want to facilitate. So we're not telling people in advance what they're going to learn. We're allowing that to be open. So then we have the experiences. Then what we do is we move into reflection. That's the part where we go back and we reflect on the experience or experiences. The questions: what did you notice? How did you feel? What feelings arose? Again, mindful inquiry, process-oriented questions. What did you feel? What stood out? So it's about, in some ways, reconstructing from the different perspectives of those in the room. If you think about a circle, everybody has a different take because we're all different and we experience things in our own ways. So being able to sort of really put that out. Next part is generalization. This is the Cole language. So from there, it's what did we learn? And so when we facilitate this, we sort of look back over all that and think back over, and then the what did we learn, we can frame those questions in relation to whatever we're working on. What did we learn about ourselves? What did we learn about ourselves as activists in the case of our work? What did we learn about activism? What helps, what works, what doesn't? What did we learn about whatever it happens to be, the whole area of activism? And then the last part, the application piece, and how can we apply what we learn going forward in our own lives, in our own work, in our own communities, whatever it happens to be. So, I often use this when I'm doing anti-oppression work in my, or I always do actually, when I'm doing that kind of work in my classroom or in workshops. So we think about learning about ourselves in relation to our own identities, in social locations and sort of what the implications of that might be. So anyway, that's the overview of the model. Thanks for asking for a rerun, repeat.
I was wondering if we could maybe address briefly Heather's
Yes.
query in the chat about kind of our relationship with the institution, our relationship with the administration. And I don't know, Steve, if you wanted to kick off something about that, about whether your perception is that the events of Say It Ain't So changed your relationship to Rollins, if you think the publication of Say It Ain't So or of the book itself has caused any friction at Rollins. Do you want to kick that off?
So I guess I don't know that I've seen so much direct change, except the president of the college is, a key player in that story. He's the one who decided to entertain the requests for an exemption from the non-discrimination policies, and we gave him an opportunity to look at the chapter before publication, and we had a meeting with him. And so, I think maybe that piece, like setting us up in a very serious dialogue with the president of the college about an important kind of event, I think it brought a perspective that might not have ever gotten to the table otherwise, at least in the depth that it did, and with the level of sophistication that it did.
Great. Well, I know we're sort of officially
Yes.
out of time, but
Yes.
let me just express, and then Patricia, Kathryn, Steve, you can have last words. But I just want to thank everyone profusely for spending this hour with us. I just really appreciate your time and engagement, and look forward to hearing more. I'm happy to put my contact info in the chat.
Yes, thank you all.
Oh, go ahead. Go
I
ahead,
was
Kathy.
going to say thank you, everybody. It was great to get to have this time together.
Just to echo the thanks and the appreciation for this opportunity.
Yeah, we had over 30 people here today, which I have to tell all of you, this wasn't enough time. We needed a back-to-back session so we could really get into it, but I think you get a flavor for it. One person commented that the transformation model feels like a really good set of instructions for someone who's beginning autoethnography and as a novice. So there is just so much that can be gained from reading this book, using to teach this book. And I want to thank the three of you for writing it and giving so much of yourself in this really important book. So thanks everyone for being here.